Look, it's going over there. And rockets are flying toward the Crimean bridge. A new special operation by the SBU.
The guy didn't want to. Wherever we go, there's shelling everywhere. This is probably some kind of base. There's PMU there, everywhere.
Positions toward Crimea. Bridges and airfields are under attack. Something terrible has started in Crimea.
This is fucked up.
Ukrainian Neptunes attacked 3 nuclear airfields in Crimea. Everything's on fire. It's burning everywhere. Yeah.
No way. Absolutely not. I can't believe it. Absolutely no way.
Boom! To the attack. Quiet, quiet, quiet. Are you filming? Yes. Unbelievable. There were explosions in Sevastopol, Simferopol, Yevpatoria, Bakhchisarai district, Aushta, Feodosia, Saki, and Novofyodorovka. No way. The airfields at Saki, Vardiski, and Kirovsky are on fire.
That's an explosion!
Powerful special operations have begun in Crimea to eliminate Russian military forces. The nuclear triad is under attack. The Black Sea Fleet, airfields, and oil refineries.
Get out! Blah, 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 blah.
Crimea was on fire last night. 4 key military airfields were attacked, the ones from which strategic nuclear aviation takes off. This is
Fucked up.
Saki, Gvardiskoye, Kirovskoye. A strike on the aviation. Nearly 200 without drones attacked Crimea last night. The targets of the drones were the Saki, Gvardiskoye, and Kirovskoye airfields. NASA satellites recorded a massive fire near the Gvardiskoye airfield in Crimea. At the Crystal Oil Depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. As they say, the show must go on or things are in motion. The situation at the Crystal Oil Depot in Engels has been ongoing for several days now. Meanwhile, Russia has lost another Su-25. Special Operation Forces destroyed a decision-making center in the Kherson direction, and the headquarters in Makivka was also attacked and blown up. We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the hell in occupied Crimea, because more than 200 drones attacked 3 key military airfields. Gvardeyskoye, Saki, Kirovskoye. Novofedorivka was also attacked. The floor is yours.
Novofedorovka is a warehouse near Saki. That is, in principle, it is one complex. Novofedorovka, Saki airfield. The blow was really large scale in Crimea today. We have repeatedly requested to be on air. They walked around Crimea but didn't touch Crimea. This is what she was like. A sacred cow. Honestly, today was a good, well-executed attack. Indeed, 200 drones can overwhelm any air defense. Thanks to the large number of decoys, the Russian troops, at least the air defense forces, used up their missiles today. And still, quite significant damage was inflicted on Russian airfields both in Saki and near Simferopol. Naturally, near Sevastopol as well, and the drones even reached Kerch. There are 2 airfields there that are currently being prepared for such launches for the new batches from Iran, the 2nd and 3rd ones. And these 2 airfields were also attacked, at least as of now. The operation was well thought out and excellently executed. Most likely it was our people who carried it out. So this isn't a special operation. Most likely it's army work. You could even say it's the work of Modyar, the new commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces who has just taken office. Although in reality our sailors should be the ones working in Crimea, that is the Navy, the naval forces. Within the naval forces, there should be their own Modyar, their own sailor Modyar, who will create unmanned systems forces specifically related to the maritime domain, underwater, surface, and aerial, for the liberation of Crimea. If today's attack is not a one-off, but part of a systematic effort, believe me, by the end of the year, at least half of the Russians in Crimea will have disappeared from there. They'll simply disappear. Because if this happens every day, even with 100 drones hitting the airfields each time, First, it will definitely be the airfields. Why the airfields? The Russians use the airfield area in several ways. The first is for stationing tactical or army aviation. That means airplanes and helicopters. Second, they use them to deploy airfield areas for positioning anti-aircraft missile systems and radars of the Russian Federation's radio technical troops. And third, they practically use all airfield areas as transit depots for transferring ammunition. That's why, for us, it's especially important, first and foremost, to destroy the airfields and everything located on them: airfield technical equipment, vehicles, ammunition, and of course, the aircraft themselves.
Roman Ilyich, I wanted to talk to you about aviation. In the meantime, dear audience, please like this video and write in the comments what you think about the successful operations of the ISU and about the idea that Crimea should be burning, military targets, of course, and that Russians should be swimming backstroke and freestyle to the territory of Russia. Roman Ilyich, can we assume that at these airfields that were attacked last night, enemy aircraft were also targeted, or did we only strike the fuel facilities there? What do you think?
Well, not all of those airfields currently have Russian aircraft stationed there. They have mostly pulled back to the central and western airfields. Sorry, I mean the eastern airfields in Crimea. That's why some of the airfields are used by the Russians either for army aviation, for helicopters, as forward operating bases, so-called operational airfields, or for deploying missile systems and radio technical troop systems. So this is very important for us. In order to deliver serious strikes against Russian aviation, including this, we first need to achieve air superiority. And that begins with destroying ground-based surveillance and response systems, meaning the same anti-aircraft missile systems. That's exactly what started today. The thing is, several times such operations have started and then they were cut off as if by magic. How many times have we talked about this? Here's the beginning, here's the start, and then suddenly it gets shut down again. For a month and a half, 2 months, and no one is even giving Crimea a sideways glance, at least for now. Right now, well, I'm just afraid of being wrong again. If this is the beginning of Crimea's liberation, then attacks like this should happen every night. Every night, 100 drones should be flying into Crimea.
Roman Igorovich, regarding the special operation by the SBU in Novorossiysk, including the missile carriers, what do we see? During massive missile attacks, missile carriers go out into the Black Sea. As far as I understand, they hide them in Novorossiysk and bring them out to sea on the necessary days. The question is, how can we attack all the missile carriers today so that the Black Sea fleet ceases to exist?
They have up to 100 ships and submarines left. Both submarines, there are 4 of them, and surface ships serve as missile carriers. At least they are carriers of caliber missiles. Submarines mainly carry 4 caliber missiles in their torpedo tubes. As for the ships, they can have 4, 6, or even 8. Well, it depends on what kind of launcher is installed. A few months ago, our banking company made a commitment to the Saudis not to strike Russian oil refineries or the Russian oil industry. And that includes the Black Sea fleet. That's why they now feel right at home, so to speak, at least in the eastern waters of the Black Sea. So here the question is, first of all, for the politicians. And actually, it's not even a question for the politicians anymore. Now it's a question for the security services. Why haven't they yet arrested for treason those politicians who ensured the safety of Russian hydrocarbons and the Russian Black Sea fleet? The Russians are leaving the base, say, in Novorossiysk, and only go out to sea in order to avoid being hit. So when they enter the base, which is a compact area with a high concentration of Russian ships, they are getting out of the line of fire, and then naturally they come back in mainly for maintenance purposes.
As for whether Ukrainian intelligence services could pull off something similar but on Russian territory, what are our capabilities? Do they match up? Let's discuss this.
Well, from a military standpoint, the preparation and execution of the operation were carried out at the highest level. Intelligence agencies were involved, Mossad, several other Israeli intelligence services, plus the Air Force. Again, pay attention, the main thing was the Air Force, that is long-range strike capabilities. About 200 fighter jets or various types of aircraft took off and struck previously identified targets. And moreover, the air defense had been practically neutralized beforehand by Mossad special operations. So it was a combined attack, well thought out, well prepared, and well executed. But that's from a military perspective. It's roughly like if we were now discussing whether the executioner's axe that beheaded some queen was well sharpened. Well, it was well sharpened, no doubt about it. No questions there, it was sharp enough. The real question is, why was there a need to behead at all? That's a different question. That's another aspect. The thing is, strikes on Iran or Israel at this point would ignite a war in the Middle East, and that would affect us as well. At the very least, it would hit us first and foremost by driving up oil prices. Right now, the price of oil is already over 10. Oil prices could rise by 30%. Oil could rebound to $100, up to $100 per barrel. That means Russia would get twice as many dollars from oil as before. There had been a trend of falling oil prices, a trend of a declining Russian economy, but now everything will turn 180 degrees. Oil prices will rise, revenues from Russian hydrocarbons will increase, production of military equipment will grow, purchases of ammunition will go up, and new recruits will be brought into service. So the war in the Middle East will hit us very hard through the rise of Russia. And at the very moment when it was necessary to destroy the Russian hydrocarbon sector, our banking Kagana covered the Russian oil and gas facilities from strikes by our special services and from attacks by our army. How can we counteract this? By reactivating the mechanism of sanctions based on small data. The most effective sanctions against the Russian oil and gas sector are its complete destruction, especially since it is practically begging to be destroyed. So that in the end, even Russian partisans would be the ones doing it. But we can see how they set forests on fire where Russian oil pipelines run, how they set fires, even as we mentioned in the far eastern Ukrainian People's Republic in Komsomolsk on Amur, which is precisely Duner, our so-called green wedge. A refinery was burning there.
Roman Lvovich, could you please explain why it is that what can be done with Iran, for example, can't be done with Russia today?
Well, first of all, we have nothing to do it with. Believe me, if we had the means, some of our agencies, we don't have missiles, we don't have ballistic missiles, we don't have cruise missiles, even though we should have them in a rocket building country like Ukraine, but we don't have missiles. It's both laughable and tragic, as they say. This is a question for the authorities, for all the authorities over more than 30 years of our independence. We were left without missiles during the Russian offensive operations. So yes, it can definitely be done, but we are the ones who have to do it. Us. No one is going to do anything for us. And there's no point in asking anyone. We have to do it ourselves and strike at the Russian leadership, including those in the Kremlin. The Rubliovka Baths and the Kremlin, how long have we been talking about this? We've been talking about it for 3 years. What else is there to talk about? There has to be something to do it with, right? Strikes on certain Iranian military targets and, first of all, nuclear facilities. It's not that easy to reach a nuclear facility. For example, the facility that was attacked by the Israelis is buried more than 50 meters underground. You can't just get to it that easily. That's one. And second, above this facility and above the reactor, above the centrifuges, there's an 8-meter thick layer of concrete. So they really prepared thoroughly there. That's why, if we're being realistic, Iraq's nuclear facilities weren't actually damaged. In fact, the station is still operating on Russian fuel. It hasn't been touched in that sense. There are about 5 or 6 Iranian facilities there, and basically they only tried to hit one of them, but even then they only managed to hit it from above, while inside it kept working as usual. The centrifuges are still spinning, and as for what Iran's response will be, well, who knows? Especially now that, so to speak, Pandora's box has been opened. So the strike was on a nuclear facility, which means Iran could now strike back with nuclear means, even with nuclear waste for that matter. They could take the waste from Bushehr right now and shower Israel with cesium dust. After that, you wouldn't be able to live there for 24,000 years, at least according to the cesium contamination. And if you hit with uranium, either 235 or 238, one has a half-life of 700 million years and the other 4.5 billion years. So can you imagine what would happen to Israel in that case? So again, who will end up suffering? The Zionists will slip away, they'll run off to the United States. It will be ordinary, regular Israelis who are left behind, the ones who will bear the brunt of this radiation. So these are things that must never be allowed to happen. Strikes on nuclear facilities, they are absolutely unacceptable in principle a priori. There are certain international control mechanisms like the IAEA, and it has been granted access in some areas. A continuation of the 2015 agreement was already practically ready, again under IAEA supervision together with the Europeans. But the Israelis carried out a preemptive strike specifically to prevent the agreement with Europe and the IAEA, essentially not giving Iran the opportunity to conclude this agreement. If the agreement had been in place, it would have worked from 2015 to 2018, and it did work. The IAEA fully controlled all stages of uranium enrichment production. That's why the Israelis have now created, well, for themselves, or rather, not even that. The Israelis have created a problem for ordinary Israelis. And what the response will be, well, it's hard to say right off the bat. But the Iranians aren't simple people either, believe me. There are at least an order of magnitude more of them in terms of numbers. And no one is going to forgive things like that. That's why there's still a serious bloody war ahead, which for us, it's negative. It hasn't brought us any positives at all, and it won't. Why? Because the Shaheds everyone talks about, the Iranian ones and so on, they're actually based on the Chinese Sunflower 200. The Russian Iran is not an Iranian Shahed. The Russian Garan is a Chinese Sunflower 200. No matter how many military facilities are destroyed in Iran, the Russians will keep assembling the Chinese Sunflower 200 from Chinese parts, calling it Geran just like before. If we're talking about striking the main production plants, then it should be the Chinese ones. What? Are the Israelis supposed to fly to China to destroy Chinese factories? That's something our special services should be doing. These are questions for our special services.
Dear audience, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. We're returning to our main headline topic, Russian aggression, the war Russia is waging against Ukraine. Roman Lvovich regarding the oil depot. For example, at the Crippled oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. Essentially, drones attacked the oil depot on the night of June 5th to 6th, but the fire still hasn't been extinguished. Let's assess this operation.
Well, first of all, this isn't just an oil depot, or rather, it's not a simple oil depot. If we're talking about oil depots, the Russians have thousands of them. In reality, it's a fuel and lubricant storage facility for the strategic aviation airfield Engels 2. And it's precisely in this capacity that it is very important to us. This is a supply depot. The main base and the main storage for aviation kerosene is underground, in karst caves, in caisson reservoirs. In other words, just try to get to that one. There are tens of thousands of tons of kerosene there. So from this underground reservoir, the fuel is pumped into the supply base, into the crystal, and then from there to the base or depot. It's called a pole depot, a fuel and lubricant storage facility. From there, it is used to refuel the same aircraft. And the point that was chosen was exactly right, where at least the main flow could be cut off. Of course, they still have a backup option when they can refuel directly from Chisinau. But I think we'll get to those as well. So the strike on this pole depot was excellently executed, perfectly calculated. We once discussed with you how the attack was carried out. They broke through the Russian air defense frontally using a large number of decoy drones. And the strike drones got through, took out the targets, and set 3 tanks on fire at once right away. And now, until it burns out completely, this won't stop. Kerosene is an interesting product. You can actually use it to put out fires. If you take a bucket of kerosene, pour it on a fire, it will go out. But it's the kerosene vapors that burn. And if you heat kerosene to a certain temperature and then ignite the vapors, just like what happened during the drone strike, then there's practically no way to put it out. And that's why they don't even try to extinguish it. They just step aside, dig in around it, and watch until everything burns out. And as long as there's something left to burn, it will keep burning. It could keep burning for another month.
Roman Grigorievich, today's news. Russia has lost another Su-25.
Well, most likely this loss is due to technical issues. The Su-25 is already about 40 years old. They've been flying since the Afghan war, since the 1980s. They were good aircraft, even excellent for their time when they were built, a good attack aircraft. But now they're old, really old grandpas, I would say. And technologically, of course, they're falling apart. And there aren't that many left. So now, out of 3 or 2, you can only make 1. So this fleet of aircraft the Russians have is dwindling to nothing. And even with losses like today, as reported by Russian media, they're still falling.
Roman Igorovich, over the past 2 days, we've also attacked the Moscow region where there were military targets. Roman Igorovich, what was attacked in the Moscow region over the last few days? Because the drones didn't reach Moscow, but explosions were heard in the Moscow region, and they say these were military targets. In
Moscow and the Moscow region concentrate about 30% of Russia's high-tech military production. That is 30 out of 3. in Moscow and the Moscow region. That's why it's so important for us to break through, to keep pushing through the Russian air defense. It's very difficult to do this because there are at least two defensive lines in place. The first is the frontal air defense, which is very hard to penetrate. This is in the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk regions. There, the air defense is practically packed, especially in the direction of Moscow. And the second is the site-based air defense around Moscow. So sometimes, as we see in the reports, the Russians shoot down 50 or 70 of our drones in the Bryansk and Belarusian regions. These were heading toward Moscow. Mostly they shoot down decoys, which cost a few $100s, while the missile to shoot them down cost tens of thousands. Nevertheless, some get through, and there was a strike in the Moscow region on one of the factories that produces electronic circuit boards. As I said, this is high-tech manufacturing, and at least for now, the technological process has been halted. But in reality, to reach Moscow, you need ballistic missiles. In other words, without ballistic missiles, we won't be able to break through Moscow's air defense systems. Drones won't get through it.
Roman Igorovich in the Moscow region in Zubovo, a microelectronics manufacturing plant was attacked. There's a hole in the roof. The factory in Zubovo is a production complex that's part of the Rezonit Technopark in the Moscow region. It specializes in manufacturing printed circuit boards and electronic components for various industries, including defense and industrial sectors. That's what this is about.
That's what I was talking about. Yes, so they hit Rezonit directly. The technological process has been halted, and that's the most important thing, but it can only be destroyed by ballistic missiles. Well, even a drone with 50 kilograms of explosives can't completely disable any military facility.
Roman Lvovich, from a military standpoint, how many years would it take for Ukraine to have ballistic missiles? Not just a few, of course, but in mass production. How many thousands of missiles per year would that be if we take examples from other countries that produce ballistic missiles?
Well, the thing is, Ukraine is a missile producing country. Back in the Soviet Union, we had a full production cycle for several types of missiles, starting from air-to-air and air-to-ship missiles, like the KH-35 and KH-35U, which the Neptune missile is based on. This is an aircraft-launched anti-ship missile, meaning a ship missile launched from the air. We produced it entirely ourselves, the full production cycle. There were several other missiles of this kind as well, and ballistic missiles. We produced ballistic missiles. These are cruise missiles, you could say. The KH-35U, especially at that level already. But as for ballistics, we produced intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Satan SS-18 up to the production at our Yuzhmash plant. That's 11,000 kilometers in range. That means it could reach Beijing and Pyongyang. That is, we have preserved this entire technological chain. Technical documentation, the production system, very important mechanisms for certain tests, test stands, and of course the engineering staff. About 10 years ago, we produced and launched the AROM, a whole complex that we created with an investment of $100 million and an audit. And we sold it to them as well. That was just a few years ago. So we have the entire production base for manufacturing. That is, the ballistics are there. It's not starting from scratch. In order to launch, say, serial production of those same AROMs with a range of 500 kilometers, we would need about $150 to $200 million and 1.5 to 2 years. So if this government had started it 6 years ago, by now we could have launched serial production of the HROM 2-3 times over. If at this moment we don't have this HROM, and we don't have it because it would have long since been used on Moscow. So for 6 years, this government has been dragging its feet, the green one. That's a big problem. It's long past time to send the executive branch to the armed forces of Ukraine. I've said it so many times already. We need to de-Shmihalize the executive branch. And for that, we don't need elections or re-elections. This is in accordance with our constitution, in accordance with the legal framework of our laws. And replace the executive branch. Shmihal's team just can't handle it. Absolutely can't handle it. Umerov, Shmihal, and all the rest of this Shmihal team, they're not in the right place. They need to be replaced with professionals who know how to quickly launch a program, like the ballistic one, or how to restructure the country's economy for wartime. It's an entire process. The military should be the ones working with basic military education and who understand economics. We have enough people of that level
Roman Grigorovich, to sum up, so Special Operations Forces destroyed a decision-making center of the racists in the Kherson direction, and the racists' headquarters in Makiivka was also attacked. The video report of the HIMARS MLRS strike was for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So everyone wrote that there were many killed, many wounded. The floor is yours.
Well, about Makiivka, I'm from Makiivka myself. I've said so many times already that we don't strike at the rear. So most likely our rocket troops thought so that Svetan wouldn't curse all over the place. They just went ahead and hit it. Or in Makiivka, on the main roads not far from my place. In other words, they completed the combat mission. Of course, well done. The range allows it. We have the means to strike. The HIMARS work well at that range. And naturally, in Kherson, on the so-called southern front, there's serious activity going on there now. The Russians are still at the crossroads, deciding whether to transfer the remaining reserves to reinforce the Zaporizhia direction, where there are ongoing actions, or to the right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. That is, they still haven't decided yet because the reserves that could have helped them in either direction, Putin burned through before May 9th, setting, well, unrealistic objectives. In other words, impossible tasks. So now at this moment, we can say, let's thank Putin for his complete idiocy in strategic planning. Because it is precisely his idiocy, this political trap, that is now giving us a breather. We still have about 2 months before the next wave of reserves arrives. In these 2 months, we can give the Russians a hard time. Well, we'll see what we'll give them a hard time for, and then we'll talk about it in each of our reviews.
Roman Nikolaevich, Russian armed forces have already entered the final stage in Yablonovka, Sursky Oblast, Deep State reports. It is 26 kilometers from the regional center. The gray zone also expanded in Yunakovka, a village at the epicenter of the fighting. Please comment on this, it is very important. Yablunovka.
And Yunakovka. Well, yesterday they said they were 20 kilometers from Sumy, and now it's already 26 kilometers. So does that mean they're having a negative advance or something? They've fallen back 6 kilometers in the opposite direction. That's about where they are, somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers. They're stuck there and will keep being stuck in that area. It's a small bridgehead, even from the perspective of just the Sumy region, not to mention all of Ukraine. A small bridgehead that the Russians rushed into on the heels of our retreating troops. That was already a mistake made by our politicians. We thank Putin for his political decision. Here it was a mistake by our politicians who kept our troops in offensive positions toward the Kursk direction almost to the point of disaster, nearly to catastrophe. They had to retreat because, you see, the politicians needed to have at least a better position for negotiations with the Saudis. Nothing happened to them, but we had to retreat from the Kursk region, and as our troops were withdrawing, the Russians rushed into the Sumy region right on their heels. But I'll say it again, this is about the same level as what happened in the Kharkiv region. Right now, they're in the area of Lepsi near Vovchansk. They rushed in, and that's it, they're stuck there. In the same way, the Russians will be stuck milling around near Yablonivka, Yanakivka, and so on. But that's it. They won't advance any further. That is, on one hand, there are serious fortifications there. That's the first thing. Secondly, reserves have now been redirected there, and our troops have already recovered from this strategic failure of our politicians. They've already recovered. And now, in some areas, we're even regaining previously lost positions, pushing the Russians back. And we're advancing in the Kursk direction toward Tetkino, which is nearby to the west. The Russians entered our territory, and we entered theirs. Allah Verdi.
Friends, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We discuss the military and political situation. Write a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine. Share your thoughts on Israel's special operation. And also let us know where you're watching from. Share your location in the comments. Renowned military analyst Roman Svetan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you. As usual, see you on Monday.